Chapter 6, the Executive Branch of Government. Here is a picture that documents all of the presidents of the United States. Chapter 6.1, the President and Vice President. Please write down the first two bullets. The Executive Branch. The executive branch is the branch of government that carries out or executes the laws. It can be found in Article 2 of the Constitution. The president heads the executive branch of the national government, the top political job in the country and possibly the world. The president is responsible for protecting the nation and taking the lead in solving the nation's problems. Please write down the qualifications for who can become president. Qualifications. To be eligible to run for the presidency, a person must be 1. A minimum of 35 years of age. 2. A native-born American citizen. And 3. A resident of the United States for at least 14 years. Characteristics of our presidents. All of our presidents have been male. All have been white except President Obama. All but one have been Protestant Christian, although Joe Biden has become the second Catholic president behind JFK. Most have had a college education. Many presidents have been lawyers. Lately, the candidates for president and vice president have become more diverse. Hillary Clinton, Mitt Romney, who's Mormon, Kamala Harris is the first female vice president, the first minority vice president. Geraldine Ferraro and Sarah Palin were also women who were major party ticket participants as vice president. Joe Lieberman, vice presidential candidate, is Jewish as well. Please write down presidential elections take place every 4 years in years evenly divisible by 4. Please write down the bullet. The Constitution set up an indirect method of election called the Electoral College to elect the president. Please write down electors and the explanation next to it. Presidential elections take place every 4 years in years evenly divisible by 4 when we are electing a president. Examples: 2004, 2008, 2012, 2016, and most recently, 2020. The elections are typically held the first Tuesday after the first Monday of November in the election year. We call it the general election. The Constitution set up an indirect method of election called the Electoral College to elect the president. Each state and the District of Columbia have a certain number of electors. The number of electors or electoral votes is equal to the number of senators and representatives a state has, and Washington, D.C., due to the 23rd Amendment, which was passed in 1961, has 3 of them. There are 538 members in the Electoral College, 435 for the House, 100 for the Senate, and 3 for Washington, D.C. Here is the Electoral College map and how it finished for 2020. Please write down the second bullet, which states Most states give their electoral votes using a rule of winner take all. A vote for a candidate is really a vote for electors. Most states give their electoral votes using the rule of the winner take all. To win the presidency outright, the winner must have at least 270 electoral votes. If neither candidate earns 270, the U.S. House of Representatives would choose the president. It is possible to win the popular vote and lose the electoral vote. 5 times presidential candidates have won the popular vote and lost the electoral college. I have each situation highlighted below. This slide just talks about what happens if no presidential candidate gets to 270 electoral votes. It talks about the role of the House and the Senate in choosing who the next president and vice president of the United States will be. Please write down the first bullet on this slide. Presidents serve 4-year terms. They serve a max of 2 terms or 10 years if they become president with less than 2 years remaining in the term of the previous president. George Washington started the 2-term tradition. Established by the 22nd Amendment in 1951, created after FDR was elected 4 terms. Salary and benefits. The president is paid $400,000 per year, lives and works in the White House, and receives some money for personal costs and for travel. The president has use of Camp David, special cars, helicopters, Secret Service, and Air Force One. The Vice President of the United States. In this picture is Kamala Harris. She's the first woman to be Vice President. She's the first woman of color to be Vice President, and she is the former U.S. Senator from California. Please write down the Vice President and all of the bullets highlighted and bolded under it. Please write down the Presidential Succession Act and the 25th Amendment, and then write down the 2 bullets highlighted under it. I also want you to write down the 3rd bullet, starting with, in 1967, the 25th Amendment was passed, establishing procedures in the event of presidential incapacity. The Vice President is elected with the President and chosen by the Electoral College. The qualifications are the same as the President. Article 1 states that the Vice President shall preside over or oversee the Senate. So this makes the Vice President the President of the Senate. The Vice President becomes President if the President dies, is removed from office, falls seriously ill, or resigns. The Vice President has a salary of $230,700 per year, plus additional benefits. The Presidential Succession Act and the 25th Amendment. The Presidential Succession Act of 1947 List the line of succession after the vice president. If something happened to the president and vice president, the Speaker of the House becomes President of the United States. In 1967, the 25th Amendment was passed, establishing procedures in the event of presidential incapacity. It makes clear that if the president dies or leaves office, the vice president becomes president. The new president should choose a new vice president with the help of Congress. The vice president has several roles. The vice president is the presiding officer of the Senate. The vice president announces the electoral college votes. The vice president is first in the line of succession. So if something happens to the president, he dies, resigns, or is removed from office, the vice president becomes president. And the vice president can serve as acting president. Chapter 6.2, the president's powers and roles. Please write down the first 3 bullets on this slide under presidential powers. Article 2 of the Constitution says that executive power shall be invested in the president. The president's main job is to execute or carry out the laws passed by Congress. The Constitution gives presidents several specific powers. They can veto or reject bills by Congress. They can call Congress into special session. Now, I want you to write the remaining items highlighted on this slide. Please write down: the president serves as commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The president makes treaties with other countries with the Senate approval. The president appoints officials to courts and agencies in his cabinet with support and approval of the U.S. Senate. The president grants pardons, penalties against people convicted of federal crimes. And then the president gives the State of the Union address each year. This slide just lists some of the titles given to the president. Please write down the words chief executive. Please write down the president's most important job is to carry out the nation's laws. Please write down executive order and the definition next to it. And then please write down the last bullet on this slide dealing with pardons. Chief executive, all right? The president plays several roles or has several roles. The president's most important job is to carry out the nation's laws. The president's cabinet and many department agencies help him carry out these duties. There's more than 3 million people who work within the executive branch of government. Executive order. It's a rule or command used by the president that has the power and force of a law. The president has the power to appoint justices to the Supreme Court and other federal courts. The president can also grant pardons, declares forgiveness and freedom from punishment. He may use reprieves and amnesty as well. Please write down the words chief diplomat. Please write down the first bullet and the last bullet on this slide. The president is the nation's chief diplomat. The president leads the foreign policy of the United States. They help the government recognize foreign governments. The president makes treaties with other nations with the Senate's consent. And the president can enter into executive agreements with leaders of other countries. The president names ambassadors, who are officials that represent the United States and other nations. Please write down head of state and the first two bullets on this slide. Head of state. The president is the living symbol of the nation. The president represents all Americans at important ceremonies. The president greets world leaders when they visit the United States or when the president travels abroad, which means outside of the United States. The president awards medals to the country's heroes and places a wreath at Memorial Day ceremonies at Arlington National Cemetery. Please write down Commander in Chief. Please write down the first two bullets on this slide. Also, write down the War Powers Resolution Act and the explanation next to it. The President is Commander in Chief of the nation's armed forces. This allows the President to back up foreign policy decisions. Only the President can order troops into battle. The President and Congress share the power to make war. War Powers Resolution Act. The President must let Congress know within 48 hours when troops are sent into battle. The troops must be brought home after 60 days unless Congress approves their use or declares war. Please write down legislative leaders. Please write down the first bullet and the last bullet. The president can propose new laws. He meets with key senators and representatives to help build support for his proposed laws. The president can sign or veto bills sent to the White House from Congress. Please write down economic leader and the first bullet on this slide. Every president tries to help the country's economy prosper. One key task for the president each year is to plan the federal government's budget. He works with budget officials to decide what programs to support and what programs to cut back. The president is also expected to deal with the lack of jobs, rising prices, and high taxes. Party leader. Please write down party leader and the first bullet on this slide. The president is generally regarded as the leader of his or her party. They campaign, they raise money, and they give speeches to help members of their party. Chapter 6.3, Making Foreign Policy. Please write down the president and foreign policy. Please write down foreign policy and the definition next to it. And please write down the four goals listed under foreign policy. The president and foreign policy. Foreign policy is a nation's plan for dealing with other nations. The main goal of American foreign policy is national security. Another major goal is to build trade with other nations. A third goal is to promote world peace. And the fourth goal listed here is to advance democracy around the world. Foreign policy team. The president is helped by close aides, the National Security Advisor being one, in the White House, and a large team of advisors on foreign policy. The State Department, the Defense Department, and the National Security Council are a part of this team. The CIA and the ODNI, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, are a part of this team as well. This is a pretty famous picture here. You could see President Obama, Vice President Biden, and his foreign policy team. And this is a real live image of when we killed Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind 9/11. Next, we're going to talk about the tools of foreign policy. Please write down treaties and the definition next to it. Please write down executive agreements and the definition next to it. Treaties and executive agreements. Treaties are formal agreements between two or more governments. Treaties need Senate approval. Two-thirds of the Senate must vote to approve a treaty. Executive agreements. An executive agreement between the president and the leader of another country. A Senate approval is not needed for executive agreements. 2. Appointing ambassadors. Ambassadors represent our nation to other nations. The president appoints about 150 ambassadors who are confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Foreign aid. Foreign aid consists of money, food, military help, or other supplies given to other countries. 4. International trade. The president has the power to make economic agreements with other nations. These agreements cover what products may be traded and the rules for trade. The president can use trade sanctions, which are used to stop or slow trade with another nation in order to punish it. 5. Military force. As commander in chief, the president or presidents sometimes decide they must use the armed forces to carry out a foreign policy decision. Chapter 6.4, How the Executive Branch Works. Please write down Executive Office of the President and the explanation next to it. Executive Office Agencies. The EOP's main purpose is to help the president do his or her job. It has close to 2,000 employees and a budget around $400 million. The EOP is overseen by the president's chief of staff. They decide who gets to meet with the president and serves as one of the president's advisors. The White House Office. The White House Office is the heart of the EOP and is made up of about 500 people who work directly for the president. They help develop policy and communicate with Congress and the public. Joe Biden's chief of staff is a guy named Ron Klain, and the chief of staff is probably the most powerful person outside of the president in the White House. The White House press secretary is Jen Psaki, and she communicates the president's message to the rest of the country. Executive Office of the President continued. The Office of Management and Budget helps the president prepare the federal budget. The OMB also monitors spending in all agencies of the executive branch. The Council of Economic Advisors helps the president carry out the role of economic leader. It gives advice on economic policy issues like job growth, prices, and trade. The National Security Council advises the president on matters of national security. It includes the vice president, the secretaries of state and defense, the chairperson of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the director of national intelligence is on it too. Here is a picture of a cabinet meeting with President Trump. The President's Cabinet. The President's Cabinet consists of the department heads of the 15 executive branch departments. President Washington started the tradition of meeting with cabinet members. Cabinet members give the president advice on matters that touch on the departments they lead. The president decides when the cabinet will meet. Cabinet members spend most of their time directing the activities in their departments. These individuals are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. The Department of Homeland Security was the most recent addition in 2002. The Vice President has played a bigger role in recent presidential administrations and have been a part of cabinet meetings as well. The federal bureaucracy. Please write down the words federal bureaucracy and the explanation next to it. Federal bureaucracy. The agencies and employees that make up the executive branch. They do three basic kinds of tasks. One, the agencies write rules that put laws passed by Congress into practice. They turn those guidelines into specific rules so people and businesses can follow them. Two, they carry out the day to day activities of the federal government: mail, national parks, border patrol, collecting taxes are some examples. Three, they oversee and regulate certain activities to make sure industries are obeying the rules. They monitor banks. They make sure products are safe to use. They make rules to protect our health and environment. Congress must pass a law to give them the power to do their work. Please write down government corporations and the explanation next to it. Please write down executive agencies and the information next to it. Please make sure you write down the highlighted part where it says reports to the president. Please write down regulatory commissions and the explanation next to it. And then write down the portion underlined that says regulatory commissions do not report to the president. The executive branch has many independent agencies that are not a part of a cabinet department. Government corporations, businesses that are owned by the government that provide goods and services that are not supposed to make a profit. For example, the U.S. Postal Service and the Tennessee Valley Authority, which provides energy for 7 states, are examples of government corporations. The president usually appoints the heads of the departments and agencies. There are executive agencies, which are independent agencies that deal with certain specific areas within the government. They report to the president. Some examples are NASA, the CIA, and the EPA. We also have regulatory commissions. They protect the public by making and enforcing rules that an industry or group must follow. They do not report to the president. An example is the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. They oversee things like TV and radio. Please write down civil service system and the definition next to it. Please make sure that you put merit system at the end there in parentheses. Please write down merit system from the last bullet and the explanation next to it. Government workers. The top jobs in a department or agency usually go to political appointments made by the president. About 90% of those who work in the federal government are civil service workers. They usually have permanent jobs unlike political appointees. Civil service system used to hire government workers on the basis of open, competitive examinations and proven ability. We call that a merit system. The Office of Personnel Management directs the civil service system, which is based on a merit system. Officials are chosen from lists of people who have passed the test or have met civil service standards.